We're going to be looking at this video by Jaclyn. It claims that Jesus was plagiarized off of pagan religions. Her videos have been endorsed before by the Richard Dawkins Foundation. I'm primarily interested because it's gotten way more attention than it deserves. As you're about to see, Jaclyn's video is like the atheist version of young earth creationism. It's a historical bloodbath.
Hey guys, so today I want to make a video disproving Christianity. If you look at history, there are so many stories, mythological stories, before Jesus that had almost the same exact storyline that he had. Mithras was a Roman god.
In 2010, I contacted the Mithraeus Edwin Yamauchi, professor emeritus at the University of Miami, about the claims that Jaclyn is going to be making about Mithras. Yamauchi is the author of Persia and the Bible, and in 1973 he was invited to deliver a paper at the Second International Congress of Mithraic Studies in Tehran, a conference hosted by the then Empress of Iran. He states, quote, "We have almost no evidence of Mithraism in the sense of a mystery religion in the West until very late, too late to have influenced the beginnings of Christianity. There are a handful of inscriptions that date to the early 2nd century, but the vast majority of texts to date are dated after AD 140. Leonard Patterson, in his book Mythicism and Christianity, published by Cambridge University, states that there is, quote, no direct connection between the two religions, either in origin or development. Gary Leese at the University of Munich states, neither Mithraism nor Christianity prove to be an obvious and direct influence upon the other. Their beliefs and practices are well accounted for by their most obvious origins, and there is no need to explain one in terms of the other."
From a virgin on December 25th.
Yamauchi states, quote, "That's definitely not true. He was born out of a rock. The rock birth is commonly depicted in Mithraic reliefs." According to the Encyclopedia of Religion, quote, "Mithras, who being in the form of a rock, had no mother whose milk he could drink, is depicted as a baby drinking the juice extruded from bunches of grapes." Manfred Kloss at the Free University of Berlin, in his book The Roman Cult of Mithras, states, "The literary sources here are unmistakable. Mithras was known as the rock-born god. The inscriptions confirm this nomenclature. One even reads, quote, 'To the Almighty God, Son Invincible, generative God, born from the rock.' Mithras also appears in the archaeological record as the rock-born god. Many images represent the god growing out of a rock with both arms raised aloft. But in Jaclyn's defense, I guess one could technically say that rocks are virgins."
On December 25th.
As for December 25th, the Bible never tells us when Jesus was born. According to this article published by the Biblical Archaeological Society, the earliest association of December 25th with Jesus that we have in the historical record wasn't until the mid-400s in the Western Roman Empire.
He died for our sins so that sinners could have everlasting life. But of course, he was resurrected from the dead.
Yamauchi states, "We don't know anything about the death of Mithras. We have a lot of monuments, but we have almost no evidence because this was a secret religion. But I know of no reference to a supposed death and resurrection." Richard Gordon at the University of Erfurt, in his book Image and Value in the Greco-Roman World, declares that there was, quote, "no death of Mithras, and so there can't be a resurrection."
He also had 12 disciples, and they also had a Last Supper before he died.
The earliest origin of this internet myth that I've been able to find is the 19th century theosophist, crank historian Godfrey Higgins, where he states it without a source. This got repeated by Timothy Freke and Peter Gandy, and then later Akaria S., but all they could ever do is produce images of Mithras surrounded by the zodiac. The reality is Jesus' 12 disciples were actually derived as a symbolic representation of the 12 tribes of Israel. Crazy, right? The 12 tribes couldn't have been derived from something like Roman Mithras worship or the zodiac's 12 divisions because we have Torah source material that mentions them at least before the 9th century. This is something that the atheist historian Richard Carrier has pointed out. It's just ironic that the fact that Jesus had 12 disciples as a symbol of the 12 tribes happens to be one of the more widely accepted facts about him among historians. I'll link an article I wrote against a Salon piece where I quote 3 New Testament scholars that state this.
The people who used to worship this god would have symbolic meals of his flesh and blood.
I can only assume that Jaclyn's source is referring to a sacrifice of a bull which was called the Torah Bullium. Again, the dating is way too late, only first attested in the mid-2nd century. When Richard Carrier, the atheist historian, was asked this on the Infidel Guy radio show, this was his response.
Just in general, I see no reason to believe the Christian Eucharist is a copy of any pagan ritual per se. I think it's far more likely that it's a clever modification of Jewish sacrificial theology. And though it resembles many pagan ideas, these ideas were actually common throughout ancient Near Eastern cultures, including Judaism, for centuries before the Common Era. So you don't really have to look any farther than Judaism and its pre-Christian pagan influences to find where these ideas come from. it's not a question of like literal direct borrowing from any particular cult. I mean, it's not like Christians went and studied Mithraism and said, oh, we're going to make a religion based on this. That's
Right.
not how it happened. And I'd say that applies to all parallels that are shown between Jesus and other pagan deities. I mean, I think we need to first look for a full and sufficient basis already in Hellenized Jewish thought.
But anyways, the next god I want to talk to you about is Krishna. Here are a few things that they had in common. Both the son of God, both sent from heaven to earth in the form of a man, both called the Savior.
Richard Carrier and scholars like Benjamin Walker have pointed out that Hindu texts like the Bhagavata Purana and the Harivansa, written around the 6th to 7th centuries AD, do in fact synchronize certain Christian ideas with Hindu religion. Those late parallels are in part what Jaclyn's sources will be referring to. But here's a challenge. Of the thousands of scholars publishing, quote me a single living New Testament or historical Jesus scholar holding a university position on the face of the planet that thinks that Krishna worship was a source influence on the historical Jesus. Name a single one. Do you seriously believe that a first century Pharisee like Paul got his idea about a crucified Messiah literally over 2,000 miles away from a blue guy in a polytheistic pantheon? Especially considering our undisputed Paulines like Galatians claim that Paul knew Jesus' own brother, James, and spent time with some of the disciples.
His adoptive father was a human and a carpenter.
Keith Thompson claims that he contacted Vasuda Narayanan, a distinguished professor of religion with a PhD in Hinduism at the University of Bombay, and he asked her about this claim regarding Krishna. Quote, to the best of my knowledge, his father was not a carpenter, more like a prince. I can't imagine why people would sit back and cook up all these conspiracies. She also made it clear that Krishna's mother Devaki wasn't a virgin, since she was married to Vasudeva, and the whole myth centers around Krishna escaping the infanticide imposed on his 7 older siblings.
The second person of the Trinity.
Your sources are talking about something called the Hindu Trimurti. The Trimurti shows up in a few places in the Puranas, which are composed hundreds of years after the Christian doctrine of the Trinity had already been established. We know where Jews got their Trinity doctrine from. Scholars like Daniel Boyarin and Benjamin Sommer have shown that it is an extension of Second Temple Semitic divine fluidity, specifically Shekinah embodiment theology. Imagine my shock. Christianity developed out of Second Temple Jewish theology. I'm sorry if that's boring.
Both celebrated a Last Supper. Both forgave his enemies. Both descended into hell and were resurrected. Many people witnessed their ascensions into heaven.
Dr. Edwin Bryant, professor of Hinduism at Rutgers University, is the translator of the Bhagavata Purana for Penguin World Classics. He was asked about this claim and responded by referring to the Mahabharata, where Krishna was shot in the foot by a hunter named Jara by accident. After this, he died. His spirit, not his body, then ascended. Bryant stated that there was no resurrection and that his followers who came to see him could not see his spirit ascending.
Horus. It was a god that was written about in the Egyptian Book of the Dead in 1280 BC, and here are some of the similarities. First of all, he was a son of God. Some people disagree whether or not he was born of a virgin, but that's in some stories of him.
Cite me a single Egyptian text that says this. Find me a single living Egyptologist on the planet holding a university position in the field of Egyptology who says this. The irony is Plutarch tells us the entire myth centers around Isis being unable to find Osiris's severed phallus because it was eaten by an oxyrhynchus fish, so she has to fashion one. She then becomes pregnant with Horus by descending on him in the form of a hawk. Mike Heiser has an MA in Egyptology and another MA and PhD in Semitic languages. In a recent lecture, he stated, quote, Isis was not a sexual virgin when she conceived Horus. Egyptian texts never claim this.
He was baptized in a river.
This theory originates from the 19th century crank theosophist and druid mystic Gerald Massey, page 186 of Ancient Egypt Light of the World, where he gives no source. There is no Egyptian text which says that Horus was baptized. Walter Burkert is Emeritus of Classics at the University of Zurich and Professor of Philology at Berlin and Harvard. In his book Ancient Mystery Cults, he addresses the claim of baptism existing in Egyptian religions, stating, quote, there is hardly any evidence for baptism in pagan mysteries, though this has often been claimed. Richard Carrier was asked what he thought of the idea that Horus was a prototype of Jesus. His response, no, and I suspect you may be a victim of that awful pseudo-documentary zeitgeist. If so, then almost everything you've ever heard is false or undemonstrated. There are no ancient texts about Horus that parallel Jesus at all, except perhaps in some aspects of their nativities.
He raised someone named Asar, A-S-A-R, from the dead, and that actually literally translates to Lazarus.
No, he did not. Asar is the Egyptian word for Osiris. Osiris was resuscitated by Isis in order to conceive Horus. I have formal training in Hebrew. Lazarus was an extremely common name in 1st century Judea. It comes from the Hebrew Eliezer, which is a combination of the words El, God, and Azar, he helps. In fact, I happen to mention your claim to my friend currently defending his MA in Semitic languages at Rutgers. His wife studies Egyptology. He told me, none of the things that she said about Horus are true. He then pointed out that it isn't even conceivably possible for Osiris to share an etymology with Lazarus, because the Semitic term for God which comprises the name Lazarus isn't used in Afro-Asiatic languages like Egyptian.
He had 12 disciples.
Glenn M. Miller writes, my research into the academic literature does not surface this fact. I can find reference to 4 disciples, variously called semi-divine Hiroshemsu, meaning followers of Horus. I can find reference to 16 human followers, but I cannot find 12 anywhere.
He was crucified and rose from the dead 3 days later. That's just a few things. They didn't have that much in common.
Horus was not crucified. Are you seriously suggesting that first century Romans didn't crucify Messianic Jewish leaders? We literally have a first-century ossuary containing the bones of a Jew whose heel still contains a crucifixion nail. We don't need to go spelunking in Egyptian tombs to explain crucifixion. Jews had plenty of that to go around at home and were quite aware of it without the help of Egyptian religion. Josephus tells us that 2,000 Jews were crucified at the order of Varus after a particularly widespread series of Judean revolts. 3 of his own acquaintances were crucified.
Now, a lot of different religious scholars will debate certain aspects of these different gods and say, well, that wasn't true and that wasn't true, but you can't begin to debate them all. You can't say that there's no credibility for any of them being historically accurate.
Yes, I do claim that they're all stupid. And no, religious scholars don't debate these things. I'm aware you would get that impression on the internet from Makaria S.'s websites and the millions of other gullible forums and sensationalist books parroting it, but it's not from scholars actually holding university positions. You sound like a creationist trying to convince us that evolution is disputed by biologists. The progressive New Testament scholar James McGrath has literally compared Jesus' mythicism to evolution denial. Name a single living Egyptologist employed by a university in the field of Egyptology, not Akaria S., who thinks that Horus was crucified or born of a virgin.
It seems like nobody knows about this. I didn't know about it until quite recently, whenever I started researching religion and it became interesting to me.
You know, when prominent atheists like you and Richard Dawkins are so gullibly preserving internet urban legends like this, it really doesn't help your cause.
Krishna was a carpenter, born of a virgin, baptized in a river.
Are you saying that was written in history?
One tradition claims Mithras even had a virgin birth.
There's the Persian god Mithras.
Have Mythicism, the god Mithra, who was born from a virgin mother.